to today's webinar, which is episode 2 out of our 3-part webinar series. If you attended last week, welcome back. We are happy to see your face again. If this is your first episode of the series, welcome. We've got a really exciting agenda for today's show. Tons of fun topics and points of conversation to discuss between our really smart guests that we've brought on today, and I will introduce them momentarily. I have a couple of quick housekeeping items, but before I give those to you, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Matt Sprague, for a quick announcement.
Thank you very much, Evan. Hello, everybody. Just one note to everybody on the call. We were having a really good time before we started this. We don't have to stop smiling just because we went live. We were having really good conversations, so I'm excited to hear everything that's about to transpire. I'm going to jump off momentarily. I'm going to kind of be the person behind the scenes monitoring any of the questions that any of our attendees want to submit. So be sure to find that area on your panel right now. You can ask questions. I'll filter through them and from time to time pop back in to ask those questions, or at the end add some of those questions as well. So that's my point. So just make sure you ask those questions. We definitely want to hear from everybody.
Thanks, Matt. We're already sick of your face. You can leave now. No, but seriously, feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. This is an open Q&A session, so we hope to get to as many as we can. Again, it is first come, first serve, so if you get your questions in late, unfortunately, there's no 100% guarantee that we can get to them. A couple of quick housekeeping items from my side. Again, this is a 3-part webinar series. This is week 2, episode 2. Just to give a little bit of context to this whole series, if this is your first time, last year we did a new normal sort of webinar series that brought on, significant leaders throughout the construction industry to have conversations around what was happening to the industry in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, sharing how leaders were navigating these struggles and the changes of new with this new pandemic. Now here we are a year later, and we are bringing back some familiar faces and some new faces to share some reflections and learnings from the past year. And episode 2 is specifically focused on moving forward. So what are some of the lessons, reflections, and things we've learned in the past year that we're going to take into our organizations, into leadership, with our peers into the next year? What are some of those silver linings of the pandemic, some of those lessons learned that will help us be more efficient, productive, etc., moving forward? So with that said, the 2 last items I needed to share real quick. If you do need to drop today at some point halfway through the webinar, that's fine. This webinar will be available on demand after the fact. So if you have an emergency or something, no worries at all. You will get an on-demand link sent to your email, I believe a day or 2 after the show concludes. And the last item is you will get a certificate of participation. So if your employer is requiring something that states that you attended this, you will get that in your email following the webinar. So like I said, today's show is really looking forward. I think the official title is Predictions and Projections, What the Future Will Hold for the Construction Industry. We've got 2 super smart gentlemen on today's call. They are familiar faces in the e-builder world. So if you're a frequent consumer of our content, their wonderful faces will look familiar. Barry LePatner and Christopher Haite are our 2 amazing guests today. Barry LePatner is the founder and partner of LePatner and Associates. He's been with them for a while. Obviously, he's the founder. Christopher Haite is the managing civil engineer of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Chicago. That is a mouthful. So with that said, I'm going to hand it off to each of you to tell the audience a little bit more about yourselves. People are probably already sick of me talking. So Barry, why don't you share a little bit about yourself, where you are at professionally in your career and your passion for the construction industry?
Well, thank you, Evan, and thank you, Matt. And it's always a pleasure to be with my friends at eBuilder and Trimble and join them in an interesting discussion about where the AEC world is and how it interfaces with the rest of the business world, because the two are integrally involved. For a long time, several decades, I've had the wonderful pleasure of representing thousands of architects, engineers, owners, developers, commercial institutions, real estate people of all stripes, as advisor and consultant and litigator. So my good fortune has been to be involved in almost every aspect of the design and construction process, and it's allowed me to meet a lot of wonderful people.
Great. Well, thanks for showing up today, Barry. We appreciate you, and I know you're a popular guy, so we're grateful that you're here today. Christopher, how about yourself? Why don't you share a little bit about yourself professionally and your career with the audience?
Sure. Thank you, Evan. Christopher Haite. I have been with Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago for almost 30 years now. Most of that has been, all of that's been in the engineering department. Most of that has been in the construction field, from inspection all the way up through management. And my latest role for about the last 10 years is program management, which is overarching between design all the way through construction, and includes the capital planning aspects, and basically looking towards the future. So that's what I've been doing, and eBuilder's been a valuable tool in that effort. So we had identified a few years ago that we need to expand our electronic abilities to include the capital planning and a few other aspects of what we do. And eBuilder's done a very good job of filling in the gaps that we were missing.
Thanks for that, Chris, and we appreciate also that you were able to join us today. So just before we jump into this conversation, two quick things. We're going to aim to go for about 30 to 40, 45 minutes, depending on how long you guys talk for and the insights that you guys are able to share. Like I said, once we get neck deep into this thing, I have some folks from my side that are going to be sending me questions throughout the conversation. So you may see myself or Matt jump in and throw Barry or Christopher the curveball. And we'll see if that happens, but they'll be on their tiptoes in case that does. The second item is this is meant to be an informal conversation. That's the way I like to run these things is if Barry says something that Christopher doesn't like, I'm going to have Christopher jump in and attack him on it. So this is how I like to run these things. So with that said, I'm going to open us up with a sort of general question of the last year that will really inform how this conversation goes over the next hour. And that is, Christopher, I'll hand this one over to you initially to answer. What are some of the lessons you've learned over the past year of the pandemic? And what are they, and how is your organization taking those lessons learned into the future?
So first of all, also government agency, right? So my experience is on the government side. And the biggest lesson learned, or the biggest thing that affected us for the pandemic was this concept of not working from the office anymore, and how to incorporate that, where our agency was one of my vision or my belief, right way said, okay, yeah, anybody that can work from home, let's work from home. So obviously, for the plants that we operate and some other things, you have people that physically need to be there, but anybody else that could, from the design side and from the management side, that could work from home, could work from home. However, being a government entity, there was a lot of paper, right? And so as a matter of, okay, how do we manage that, and how do we facilitate doing the things that we used to do in paper or physically face-to-face, or meetings and everything else? And obviously everybody's accustomed to Zoom meetings and everything else now, and finding a way to do that and make it consistent. That's the thing, is that so if Evan's doing it or Barry's doing it, that you're both doing it the same way. And that was really the push, is finding out that, oh, by the way, Bob over here was doing it one way and Marianne over here was doing it a different way. We need to make sure that everybody's doing it the same way so that expectations are met. So that was one of the biggest things that I saw from the management side. Logistics was the other one with regards to it became more difficult communication wise when you're not physically in the same space. Oh, a question pops up. Oh, wait a minute. How do I get a hold of so-and-so because they're not at their desk, right? Well, I don't have their home phone. I can email them. I get, and so really it was the communication piece and the change, the biggest change that I felt was the change on how that interaction needed to take place. So that was one of the biggest learning curves that we had.
Now I have a follow-up question for you on that. Do you feel that those changes are permanent or going to last into the future? For example, is there more flexibility from your organization's side? I know it's a government agency, so things can be a little slower from the technology adoption side. Are you folks going to let employees that can work from home past this pandemic, or what sort of insights can you share there?
Sure. No decision's been made yet, but I know it's being evaluated because, and part of that is because we found that certain jobs can be done as efficiently at home as they can be in the office. And employees feel the benefit, the benefits of working from home, especially depending on your commuting time. Chicago, right? And some people are commuting an hour one way, right? So if I can lap 2 hours off of my work day and still be as productive in my work day, then there's that added benefit, right? The employee feels better, the work output's better, and so the question I think that, and again, that's an HR question, whatever else, I can't get into specifics there, but really it's a matter of, okay, how do we evaluate how to determine who can work from home, who cannot, how to manage that, how to best delineate that piece. Is it 2 days in the office, 2 days, that whole piece. So that we internally are struggling with that. I've talked to I talked to other people, not government side, but in private sector, that where they're looking at the economics of it, right? In government, you're a little bit different in that you're like, oh, you've got sunk costs of building or whatever else, so we don't worry about that as much. Whereas, hey, if I'm a business and I'm renting space, they're like, well, wait a minute. We've had people working from home for 6 months. We've seen no drop in productivity. Why am I renting the space? And so I'm seeing it more on the private side from my interactions that, hey, there's this push to move towards a more mobile environment that right now, again, for our agency, at least, we're still a little bit reluctant on that. But again, government works slower.
And I'll just say one thing. Your background right now is very professional looking, but if I was seeing was it your home environment that we were looking at the other day when we were meeting?
That is correct.
I like that background too as well. I'll just say that. Barry, I'll throw the same question over to you. And just to remind you, what were some of the lessons learned over the past year of the pandemic that you and your organization will be taking into the future?
Well, let me first point out, Evan, that this past year or more probably has been the most disruptive force in our entire nation than we've ever experienced. Short of looking back to what an event like World War II would have meant to our country, certainly more than 9/11, as impactful as that was, the pandemic has really reached into every home, every business, every social organization, and every aspect of our culture that truly was a disruptive force. And what that meant is that everyone has had to do what most people are totally uncomfortable with, and that is deal with change. And for the past year, I've spent countless hours, mostly on the phone, sometimes with Zoom calls, and occasionally in personal meetings with leaders of organizations, whether they were heads of construction companies, whether they were heads of architect or engineers, real estate owners, institutional owners, leaders of accounting firms, law firms, to be sure. And in every sense of the word, when I finished long discussions with them, what became very, very clear is that what permeated the minds of all of these leaders were combinations of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. No one confided in me that they had the answers for their organizations on how they should be run, let alone what the next 6 months or a year is going to be. And I think that was the big challenge that faced everyone who had to work in our industry, of course, because to me, the real issues were, can an organization understand how it can best communicate within itself and then outwardly to clients and third parties? And also, how are we going to be flexible? And that concept of flexibility took many, many different forms. Some took to Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Others tried to have regular meetings of one kind or another, collaborations and the like. But by and large, what we really saw was that people were forced to confront the uncertainty, because you may have felt, I know how to organize my own firm, the people I know, but that may not have matched up with the parties you had to do on team members on a project, or with clients, all of whom had their own individual uncertainties about whether the project should go forward or halt permanently, be abandoned, and how they were dealing with their own issues of lenders continuing to fund it. So what we really saw here, and what is the biggest challenge that has confronted everyone in our industry, is the question of how do we identify and manage risk, the ones that are before us today, and the ones that we look downstream as we're changing and adapting to a new environment. And by and large, people in our industry are not comfortable with change, which on a separate subject is why we haven't adopted technology. But those were the issues that I saw. And when my conversations got down to other levels, I realized the people in the organizations who were most adaptable to the changes were those who were 40 years old and younger. They had grown up in an environment where our world has been changing over the last 20, 30 years, and they knew how to adapt technology. They knew how to make solutions that was with a new app. But older principals, people who were 50, 55, 60, 65, they had more uncertainty because they didn't see many new ways to make problems get addressed and resolved. So I think that is what I saw over the last year in terms of what's in front of the industry, because this pandemic is not going away, and there's fears from our scientific community it's going to be around for years to come.
Well, one of the most interesting sort of current impacts that I think took a little bit of time to really come to play until late last year, I think it's Q3, Q4, really Q1 of this year, is the cost of materials, especially steel and lumber, have exploded. Anecdotally, I've experienced this in my life, both myself and with my friends. I was mentioning this to our guests in episode 1. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and I have friends that put down deposits on new builds, and friends who didn't put down deposits and secure their spots on new builds, and they're having builders come back to them and saying, hey, it's $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more expensive now because the price of lumber has just absolutely skyrocketed. I was planning on doing a new fence in my backyard. That is being put on hold because I saw the cost of what it was going to take to build that. So that the impact on the supply chain has been severe, especially as of recently. Christopher, I'll throw this question your way first. What has this supply chain impact had on the construction activity? And when do you think the supply chains will rebound from what they're currently experiencing?
Good
and I
question.
know that's a loaded question.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I do not have the answer. The second part, I have no idea. I think I'll answer that one first. As far as how long it's going to take to rebound, really, that's going to be dictated on a number of things, right? You know, we had, and it was a compounding issue, right? This was not just the pandemic. You had the pandemic. You had what happened down in Texas. You had the Suez Canal. You had, you know, a bunch of these things that were all working together that then compounded the issue, right? And like the lumber, my understanding is that a lot of it's a labor shortage too, right? So you've got the pandemic's causing a labor shortage, and then these other supply chain pieces there. So rebounding, I think it's going to be compounded two ways. One, right? Once even we get back up to, let's say, normal staffing levels, right? Which again, 6 months, maybe, right? Depending on our current trajectory, where we're going. That's kind of my guesstimation on that one. If we keep in this the direction we're going, you're still going to have then that backlog, right? Everybody, you putting off your fence and everybody putting off that stuff. So then you're going to have this, you know, then it's going to be supply demand. Then it's going to be normal reasons why. And again, who knows if in the fall we have a new variant, but you know, so all these things play, and that gets into what Barry was saying before about the whole risk thing is, wow, even if you have a crystal ball, I wouldn't trust what's in it anyway. So part of that is kind of deciding, okay, how am I going to manage this? Regarding how it affects our projects directly, most of our projects are heavy construction, so not as much lumber as it would be steel that affects us. I don't know of any direct impacts other than we've had some contractors saying, hey, wait a minute, my cost is going up, and it has to go up past a certain point for, you know, again, government, we do low bid contracts, whatever. And so if it goes up past a certain point, then they can submit and whatever else. But we've not had any direct impacts that I'm aware of right now. I think it's, and there's going to be a lag on our side for that, because really the steel, as you said, the last 3 months or so is when it's really just gone crazy.
Barry, what's your take on the whole supply chain situation?
Well, when the pandemic started, basically early last year, one of the first statistics I went to was, what is the percentage on most large projects of materials, equipment, and other supplies that is ordered from overseas? Because as the result of globalism, so many manufacturers saw the opportunities to go overseas and in a variety of nations, many of them in Asia and the Trans-Pacific, found factories where they could produce products at a fraction of what they were producing them here in North America, let's say. So the number was roughly about 30%, which meant that all ongoing projects of any scale, and including some projects like schools and warehouses, institutions, were going to be severely impacted by supply chain issues, because those are smaller organizations. A lot of the suppliers are small factories, small suppliers in different countries. And between limitations on shipping, air traffic, limitations on whether their employees were being impacted by the pandemic, this was going to severely impact work back home. And it did. And it turns out that it has been a worldwide problem. By the way, today, if you get into a collision in your car, whether it's an American-made car, a Japanese-made car, whether it's electric or whether it's gas infused, you are not going to get the parts delivered to your body shop very quickly. Okay? Some are waiting 2 and 3 months from factories here and around the world, and it continues to this day. But what we've seen, and Christopher is correct, you've seen this and you are correct, wood and lumber, some of them have gone up 37% or more. Some have gone up higher and then they've dropped down. These costs have severely impacted some projects. And the question is, when are they going to go down? And most industry standards today, industry studies today, are showing that we can expect these price surges to ease off somewhat by the end of this year, which is some good news for us. But what is happening now as a result of this is that many of these manufacturers who took advantage of these lower prices out in far-flung countries across the globe have now decided to bring those factories back to the United States, Mexico, or Canada. And in doing so, two things are going to happen. One, it's going to take them 2 to 3 years to rebuild and repatriate those factory lines here in North America. And secondly, when they finally have done so, while we will have the security of more accessible supply chain materials, the costs are going to go up. But that's the price we're going to have to pay, not to have to worry about 30% or more of our materials looking overseas and dealing with the vagaries of blocked Suez canals or airlines stopping their regular shipments and the like.
So you mentioned, I want to continue off this sort of theme of fear, uncertainty, and doubt for a second. Barry, you mentioned all these different areas that have impacted the supply chain, whereas the Suez Canal, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic, other economic factors. I'm going to throw this question to Christopher, you first. You know, there's a lot of fear, like Barry said, uncertainty and doubt within the construction market right now, and really within, you know, the global economy. What advice would you give owners within the construction industry right now?
Well, that became the first order of business, is to look at how we design and construct, and where are the interstices, where are the locations where we can make adjustments. The first attack that we talked about with clients was to challenge the architects and engineers and all the other designers on a project to look at the specifications for products that they ordinarily just put in the specs and send it off to the construction industry and say, we want you to verify the sourcing of these materials to see if there's still viable places for us to go to buy materials, or whether we have to find alternatives either in substitutions or in alternative materials that are different from these that are no longer accessible. Secondly, we had clients go back and talk to the CMs and talk to the subs who had clearly important pieces of their projects ordered from overseas. Sometimes it was the curtain wall. And certain times it was the marble or other materials for fabulous finishes. And go back and double check and triple check with their supply chain parties that they were in privity with, and verify whether they could actually make and deliver what they said they could make and deliver, which is two different things. And there was a lot of studies going on right after that in the industry about verifying the sources and not just relying on someone writing on a piece of paper, I can deliver. So these were some of the immediate challenges that the design and construction world had to deal with, because owners were looking to them to verify that we're not going to have several materials hold our project up for 6 months.
Christopher, same question for you. What advice would you give to owners in the industry right now?
So, well, that's twofold. So you've got large owners, you got small owners, right? From the large order standpoint, and again, kind of Barry touched on this one, it's a lot has to do with the specifications, and then the two sides that I'm seeing there as well is contracts that are already awarded versus contracts that you're trying to put out for award right now. The ones you're trying to put out for award right now, the standard specifications, at least that we have used, what else is like, oh, here or alternative. The problem, and I think Barry touched on it a little bit, is that, oh yeah, you got to verify with your supplier that the pump that normally was going to take 8 to 10 weeks to get is now not 40 to 50 weeks. And that's not, because we're seeing some of that, where they're like, Yeah, no, I'm so backlogged on these orders, and it's because again, with the global economy, what is it that's lost right now? Microchips for cars right now is causing new cars to be just completely decimated as far as that goes. Doors, residential doors. A builder that I was dealing with, he said he ordered a door. He was promised 10 weeks. He just got a call on week 9 that it's going to be another 12 weeks before he gets this door. It's the front. He's like, this is not like a custom door. This is the, one of the standard doors that they make. They couldn't get, and I forget what it was, but like the PVC rail that goes, there's some component of that door that they can't get. And we're seeing that throughout the industry from the pieces that I see where, some component that you're using to build this whole thing because of the global economy, and as Barry touched on, is that I can't get that piece, so therefore I can't deliver, and now everything's getting pushed back. Cabinetry, counter, the whole bit. So back to what owners can do, again, on the small side, to me, it boils down to communication so that, hey, somebody's not surprised. If you communicated, somebody said, oh, I'll get you that in 8 weeks, and it's been 5 weeks since the last time you communicated, make sure you get that update. Find out and press so that if it is going to impact your project, right, that you can then communicate to the owner or to the buyer, whatever else. And so expectations aren't missed when you hit that deadline, right? So if you know that something that you were supposed to get in 5 weeks is now going to take 9 weeks, you need to let them know, and then you might be able to manage your schedule accordingly. On the specification side, really on the specification side, especially for me with low bid contracts, becomes very, very difficult depending on when you're receiving these bids. Like if we were to receive bids now on a project with a lot of steel in it, that cost is going to be way up here, right? And then let's say steel gets back down to a normal level in December, January, then it's going to come back down, and then there's going to be somebody say, oh, the bids were this, that, so that becomes I've seen options out there where you have a factor, whatever else, some of these other ones. I've not dealt with those personally, but those would be the types of things that you may have to write into specifications, because you need to protect your bid, right? If I put this bid out and then 3 weeks from now steel goes up another 20%, gee, now I've underbid that by whatever, and so that's the other piece. I don't know, Barry, if you have any more insight on that piece, but those would be my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what the real concern today is that a construction manager trying to bid out steel doesn't know what number to put down. And so he's going to be in a quandary, because if he orders that today and 6 months later when it's supposed to be delivered, the manufacturer says the price is up, we're going to have an untoward event on that bottom line of the project budget. And there's going to be a scramble as to who is responsible for not locking that price in when it, in many cases, can't be locked in. So we have those situations which are creating uncertainty, which is one of the reasons why lenders are hesitant on future projects. And we're going to see whether that hesitancy from the lending community is going to affect construction in the balance of 2021 and for projects that are supposed to go into the ground in 2022.
So we have a couple of questions coming in, so I'm going to save those questions. In about 10 minutes, we're going to do some random Q&A, jumping to different topics. But there is one area I want to sort of lay the groundwork for our episode next week, which is looking forward and talking about the infrastructure bill that is coming down, the pipeline with Congress here. What sort of, this is a big loaded question again, but what sort of impact do you guys believe the infrastructure bill will have on the construction industry, assuming it's passed and it's still within the general scope that people are thinking of, 1.5 to $2 trillion, depending on, of course, what Congress can finalize. Barry, I'll throw this one your way first if you want to take a stab at it.
Well, let's put this into context. As I wrote in my book, Too Big to Fall, America's Failing Infrastructure and the Way Forward, a few years ago that our nation's leaders, and it's not a Democratic or Republican problem, it's both, it's everybody's, have failed to properly fund our nation's infrastructure for the past 40 years or so. It's been almost 30 years since we raised the gas tax. The last time we raised it by 4 cents a gallon was in 1993. So we have not funded our highway trust fund monies for normal monies available to states to fix their roads and bridges. So we have now several thousand bridges that are capable of falling down at a moment's notice. We have over 5,000 dams that have been highlighted as critically capable of overflowing or blowing out and killing tens of thousands of people downstream. We have an electric grid which is fractured. We have such a need for connectivity in the rest of the country, which has never been tied into the internet and the like. So a bill such as the Biden administration seriously puts forward and seriously intends to pass in one form or another, that says we're going to fix our highways and bridges, we're going to rebuild many of those that are most dangerous, such as those that are not only structurally deficient but fracture critical, means they could fall at a moment's notice. We're going to get into upgrade our ports and deepen them to handle better transportation and the larger cargo ships that now populate our seaways. We're going to get to our airports, our transit systems. We're going to clean our drinking water and make sure lead-lined pipes are no longer really crippling many of our poorer communities. We're going to do this by revitalizing manufacturing, and we're going to invest in our R&D. All of these do make up a substantial, serious funding of our nation's critical infrastructure. What it's going to mean is the following. It means that we're going to have the infusion of close to $1 trillion, that is going to permeate the state systems for transportation, rebuilding schools, highways, railways, airports. Every state is going to have this money to utilize properly. Now, what does it really mean? It really means that the construction industry is going to see a huge infusion of hundreds of thousands, if not over several years, millions of high-paying jobs. Infrastructure jobs of all the likes I talked about involve piping, civil engineering, steam fitters, involve people who are going to be welders, people who are going to be delivering tens of thousands of delivery trucks across the nation. So we're going to see our economy infused with a massive amount of funding. And the construction industry represents 5% of our GDP, over $1.2 trillion a year in money spent. And what this is also going to start is the beginning of what I'm predicting, based on all sorts of statistics, I could go into another time, a $35 trillion construction boom over the next 30 years. Because every time our nation invested in infrastructure, it got 6 times a return in terms of growth, in terms of expanding our real estate communities. And in this case, we're going to be expanding communities into new towns and new cities because of this push of the new railways, airports, and the like.
Christopher, your take?
Well, not much I can add to that. That was a very good summary, Barry. I think talking a little bit historically though too is that especially civil engineering infrastructure is, you build it and everybody forgets about it, right? And when you talk about, oh, I need to replace something, like, well, that's underground. I don't see it. I don't care. We in Chicago we still have sections of wooden pipe, water supply line, wooden pipe. Now, It's perfectly fine as long as it stays wet, right? It'll last. But those are the types of things. And, you know, occasionally we've got, you know, we had a couple of years ago, we had a 36-inch water main that ruptured in the middle of winter and put water out on things. And basically you had cars that were stuck in 8 inches of water, or I'm sorry, 8 inches of ice. So they were stuck there for 2 months, right? Because you have to wait for it all, you know. So those are the types of things. So what Barry said, the amount of stuff that we have, the amount of infrastructure that we have to fix is not 1.2 trillion. You got to add a couple of zeros, right? So in my view, it's going to become important to, hey, prioritize and figure out where these go. Like Barry alluded to, the majority of the bridges in the United States overall, I believe, are a D or D minus as far as the rating goes. And then there's some that are worse than that. I hail from Michigan originally, and yeah, bridges are horrible, you know. And so you'll see those signs, you know, hey, the maximum load is now this. So there's one thing, the transportation and all the other pieces. But on the good news is the flip side, which is, hey, this means lots and lots of jobs. You've got engineering jobs as well as trades jobs, right? So there's going to be a lot of increase in the trades that are going to that, and so I see it as a definite benefit. Once the municipalities, the federal government, the state governments, whatever else, start figuring out exactly how best to allocate the money, and that's going to be a local issue.
Matt, are you there? Look who shows up just in the nick of time. I think we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, so actually, so this has to do, so we've got a lot of other representatives from owner organizations that are on this call. And as I'm sure you're aware, just because you want some of this infrastructure money doesn't mean you necessarily get the infrastructure money. You know, not to throw you under the bus, Chris, but like a large city like Chicago has a little bit more clout to get to the front of the line, so to speak. But I would imagine, and Barry, I'm sure that you're consulting with some of your clients as well in how they can position themselves to get towards the front of the line and have a better chance of getting getting some of that allotment for themselves. And so I'm just curious in terms of the any recommendations of things to help them be able to kind of meet the criteria that money is going to be well spent.
Well, you're raising one of the biggest questions that has already come to the fore since the president has introduced his infrastructure plan. Because up to now, for many, many recent years, we've performed our infrastructure work through private entities. And many private entities and many of the big funding organizations, such as the people who enter into public-private partnerships, do this believing that they're going to fund infrastructure and they're going to get a return on investment over 75 years and the like. Now the government is saying we're going to infuse massive amounts of money into the system, which means lobbyists right now are scrambling by and large 24 hours a day to really get their piece of the action for their clients. And the issue is going to really be a difficult one for everybody at every level of government, because the first issue we're going to have is, are we going to have a bipartisan bill? Because if it's not bipartisan, it's going to drop out a lot of people and a lot of players from the picture as to who's interested in getting this money if you're not going to support it. So I believe there's going to be some level of bipartisanship at some juncture where they're going to agree. And that's going to be an important part of infrastructure, because as I've said around the country many, many times, there is no subject that is more akin to baseball, apple pie, and motherhood than infrastructure, because it is the backbone of our history. It's the backbone of our economy insofar as our national security, our supply chain, and every other element of how we move around our nation. So we're going to have this sorted out, because eventually money drives our industry and money is going to flow here. What conduits are going to get the money through the pipelines into our cities and our states and our localities is going to be determined by that cooperation. But more importantly, one of the hallmarks of the president's statement, and it should not be disregarded, is he is saying that those areas of our nation that have previously been discriminated against because infrastructure went this direction and left the poor other areas to be poorer or not benefiting from that particular project are not going to be disregarded this time. So there are going to be massive amounts of opportunity to take advantage of requests for funding, and we're going to have a lot of new players being an important part of this infrastructure plan for our future.
Christopher, did you want to take a
Well said. I don't think I have anything else to add to that one. That was a pretty good summary of it.
No worries. We've got a couple of questions from the audience, so I'm going to jump around just to several different themes here. Christopher, I'll throw this first one at you, and we won't go for too long. I know we're hitting a time window, but what pressures has the pandemic placed on design and construction principles to do more and invest in technology?
You mean to do more with technology? Is that what that question is?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's what they mean. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I had alluded to this earlier, was that the biggest push is the requirements for social distancing, closing down of offices, not being able to physically get together, and the collaborative approach that the majority of the designers that I know was, oh, I'm going to stop by this person's desk. We're going to talk about this. We're going to do here. We meet in a room and we all kind of go around and look at that. And for our organization, I can just speak, for us, we did not have a way to do that electronically, okay? Because we never had the need before, right? So all of our, and we do the majority of our designs internally, right? So we have our own design department here at the MWRD. And so they were able to physically get together and do that. So when we went to an online environment for everybody, it was, oh, hey, how can we collaborate here? We don't have Bluebeam. We don't have some of these other collaboration tools that AE consultants and whatever else, routinely have used in the past. So we reached out to them and say, hey, can you show us how to do this? We do have AutoCAD, we do have, and so it was one of those ramping up real quick and learning real quickly, hey, how can we do this? How can we go about and manage those things? Microsoft Teams is what we were using internally for us. And, the difficulties were, hey, how do I teach somebody how to use Microsoft Teams on Microsoft Teams, right? How do I teach you how to use this computer program when I'm, so running through some of those difficulties. And I think Barry, I think I might have alluded to before, it was the 40 and under, they were the ones that snapped it up real quick and said, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this.
Christopher, I had to teach Matt how to turn on his laptop at the beginning.
Well, and I mean, just from personal experience, and we ran into this situation, which may sound strange, but this was for the 40 and up. We ran into a few people that are like, well, I don't have a computer at home. And so the 40 and younger are like, but if I go to work and I have all my, and then I go home and I watch TV, why would I have a computer? I'm not doing my computer bank. And so we were running into some of these situations where you're like, oh, I didn't even think about it. I don't own a computer. And that, well, you can give me a computer, but I don't have internet. So those were the types of things that we faced. And we did find ways to work around those. And, being able to bring in somebody by a phone call, right? Incorporating and figuring out how to get that person into a Teams call, even though they're on the phone and that they can listen in and some of these pieces. So that became different. And the ability of the ways to exchange large quantities of information became the other issue, right? Getting emails back and forth, that was pretty easy. Oh, if I want to share a document set with you, well, that's 50 gigabytes. I can't email that to you. right? So then OneDrive or, any of these other pieces there. So we internally, for us, don't have a lot of those collaboration tools, as I mentioned before, but I know of other agencies that have used those and, found it very useful. But it was really taking the old ways of doing things face to face and finding a way to turn that electronic and make it, from my side, again, from the program management side, I need to make it auditable, right? So, you and Matt had this discussion, you decided something. Well, how did you document that so that I can find out later? Because there's not a memo, there's not meeting minutes, there's that, those types of things. So that was my side here, say, document all of those pieces and everything else, and finding a way to do that with the new reality of, hey, we're not going to get together physically, or if we do, we have to do it in a different way.
Barry, I'm going to give you the last word on this. What pressures has the pandemic forced on design and construction principals to invest and do more with technology? What will that look like over the next year?
Well, the answer to that is really genetically buried within the psyche of the people who make up the industry. As I wrote in Broken Buildings, Busted Budgets, the construction industry, and includes the design industry, is the most inefficient industry of any kind in the world. And it has been that way largely because productivity by workers has gone down for 40, 50 years and has really slowed down to seriously impact how much we can produce in this country. And number two, it's because of a decided lack of implementation of advanced technology, more than any other industry. So what we are seeing even today is that when we have advanced technology such as building information modeling, BIM, which can create the actual virtual building before it's built and how it's going to look, and analyze and see how the coordination, the critical coordination will take place between the mechanical, the electrical, the plumbing, the structural engineering, and all of that, which would make sure we don't slow down construction by having change orders because the design is improper. We can alleviate that. But even though that technology has been around for many years, a great many architect and engineering firms have been slow to take it on as their template, so to speak. They have one or two teams in a large firm, or three teams who have trained to do it, but they don't have everybody as capable. Some subcontractors have taken to it, while some CMs have told me they're slow to pick it up. And what that means is we're producing Revit drawings on CAD, and we're using that during the design phase. But when you get out into the field, into the construction project, you see reams of paper all over the place, which means they're producing 2D drawings for everybody in the field instead of people pulling out their tablets and being able to call up that BIM model and see exactly how it's supposed to be done. The resistance here is going to continue until the 40 and 45-year-olds start to head their firms and say, I understand what the old folks have been doing all these years. Very nice. I respected them. They were wonderful men and women, but it's time to move forward. And we're only going to see that happen. We're only going to see the major investments that it takes. We're only going to see larger adoption of people understanding the benefits of eBuilder or any of the other project management tools when the younger people coming up into the industry avidly want to use it, but are being denied the opportunities because the structure above them is saying that's not how we've done it the last 40 years. And it's holding back the industry, not only from inefficiency, but greater profitability. And that's the future we're waiting for.
Boom. That felt like a bomb drop. That was amazing, Barry. There you have it, folks. That is episode 2 of our 3-part webinar series. Next week, we are talking all about the election and the impact of the infrastructure and local government spending that is about to hit Congress shortly. It may already be in discussion among both parties. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Christopher Haite, Barry LePatner. Barry LePatner is the founder and partner of LePatner and Associates. Christopher Haite is the managing civil engineer of the Chicago Water District. Gentlemen, thank you so much for both of your time. This was a super, super interesting conversation. We didn't get to all of the Q&A because we're running up against the time window, but gentlemen, we appreciate you both and thank you for coming on today.
Thanks, Evan. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Evan.
We hope to see you guys next week. Episode 3, Norm Anderson is a CNBC, Fox News Business, Forbes, MSNBC contributor, and one of the top lobbyists in Washington, D.C. He'll be with us to talk all about this pending infrastructure bill. So with that said, folks, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you guys next week.